Considering what he accomplished at Boise State, Chris Peterson expected to bring Washington to the elite of the Pac-12. It may take some time, though, considering what comes back from last year's 8-6 squad in 2014. We bring in Jack Follman of Pacific Takes to give his take on Washington football. So, Jack, thanks so much for joining us again. As usual, let's dive into the Pac-12 situation there in Washington. So let's start at quarterback. Cyler Miles leaves the team. You've got a quarterback competition between two very inexperienced players with KJ Carta-Samuels and Jake Browning. Where does that stand at this point?
Right now, it's still pretty open as far as last I've heard is up to, I think, today. And there's 3 guys in the running. There's junior Jeff Lindquist. He's the most experienced of the group, but he's not very experienced. Then there's also Carta-Samuels and Browning. Right now, all I've heard coming out of fall camp is that they're all pretty much neck and neck, with maybe Lindquist and Browning being maybe a tiny bit ahead of the pack of that group. And between those, it really seems like a toss-up.
So who knows what's going on inside of camp right now in terms of the decision-making process and who's impressing and who's lagging behind. But we're only 8 days away basically from a showdown with Boise State that I'm guessing that Chris Peterson has a little investment in. So it should be interesting to see what the Huskies come up with for opening night with a bit of a grudge match, even outside of just trying to win football games and prepare for Pac-12 play. So running back, you got Dwayne Washington, had a nice little season with 700 yards. He's a big back with considerable tools. What do you have in addition to Washington?
They have pretty good depth at running back. They have Levon Coleman, who's about 5'11", 225. He's a big back, not very fast, not a big playmaker, but the kind of guy who can grind out yards. They also have Deontay Cooper, who is a guy who I think has had at least 2 ACL tears, but he's still around in the program, and he's a guy who provides a lot of really good experience and depth and can really pick up yards if he can stay healthy. After that, watch out for a true freshman, Miles Gaskin, to maybe make an impact. He's from the Seattle area. He was a big recruit coming out of high school, and he's kind of a smaller, 5'9", 195, 200-pound kind of guy who's a really tough runner, but also has the speed to kind of break it out. He's a little bit more like Chris Polk, who's now with the Texans, the Husky great. So he kind of has more of the complete package than maybe some of the other guys in there.
Okay, Jack, 4 out of 5 offensive linemen lost to the NFL. Dexter Charles is the one lone guy back for this team. I don't know your assessment there. We'll get into the offensive line. I'll group in the wide receivers as well. That seems to be a pretty good group with Dante Pettis and Jayden Mickens coming off a 60-catch campaign.
Yeah, well, the offensive line actually last week, Dexter Charles actually retired from football due to injuries, and he was their only returning offensive lineman, as you mentioned. So now they have they have a couple guys who were in the mix last year, and may have started a couple games. But other than that, it's a completely clean slate. And, I mean, obviously you're not going to bet that they're going to be one of the better units in the Pac-12. But I guess the hope is with the staff is that, offensive line can be addition by subtraction. You get a good new fresh group in there with some of the guys that Peterson actually recruited, and you can get a new start there, and maybe they'll end up being better in the long run than some of the more experienced guys last year. Receiver, there's a little bit more experience and talent there, namely Jayden Mickens, who's a smaller 5'10", 75 playmaker guy who can run the fly sweep, make plays downfield, do the bubble screen, and turn it into a big play. Other than that, there's not a whole ton of experience and talent. But there is Dante Pettis, as you mentioned, who was kind of one of those guys last year who showed a little bit of what he could do as a true freshman, but you just feel like he's going to do a whole lot more with a bigger role this year. And he's kind of just a 6', 185 playmaker type guy who's not a burner, but he's also not a possession receiver. He does a little bit of everything.
Going to defense, Jack. Buda Baker, a player in the secondary that's just one of those exceptional talents that you try to keep on the field as much as possible, whether that's in the return game, even on offense. obviously is primarily a defensive back. Linebacker Shaq Thompson's gone. You also lose a four-year starter in John Tamu. The entire defensive line shot from last season, they're all gone. Can you size up this defense for Washington for us?
It's tough. Kind of like you did. I guess you can start at the secondary because that's going to be the only place where there's any much returning starters are players that have shown what they can do. And the secondary, I think, is going to be a really good young unit, one of the best in the Pac-12, led by Budda Baker, who I think is going to turn into the team star starting next year as just a sophomore. And also watch out for Sidney Jones to become the next great Washington cornerback. He's a 6-foot rangy guy kind of out there who flashed some really great potential last year, particularly in the Arizona game where he grabbed an interception and almost had, I think, a couple more. Up front is where the big questions are, though, because I think they lost all 7 starters in the front 7, including 3 guys who went in the first 2 rounds of the draft last year. I mean, they have some talent and some good young big bodies up there up front, but we're going to have to see what they can do. You have guys like Elijah Qualls, and Joe Mathis, and Will Disley, and Travis Feeney. They're guys who, people who are on the program have a lot of faith in, but we're going to have to finally see what they can do on the field this year.
So I guess the good point to the offense and the defensive deficiencies is that you have a place kicker, Cameron Van Winkle. Washington does that. If they can grab a few first downs and get it somewhat past midfield, they've got a shot of converting into points. He hit on 20 of 24, and Washington with one of the better punters in the Pac-12 in Corey Durkee, 22.5 per punt, will bail out the offense and set the defense in good field position most of the time. All right, Jack. Chris Petersen, a bit under fire in a certain sense, not that he's close to losing his job or anything like that, but I think after the NFL draft, a lot of people pointed to the talent on this football team, and that's a very simple analysis to make, that you had all these NFL draft-ready players. Why didn't you win more than going 7-6 or 8-6 last season? So is it that cut and dry, or I would think that we need to give Petersen some time to work in his system?
Yeah, it's not completely that cut and dry. I think the biggest thing last year was lack of danger at the quarterback position. I think if they would have had even an above-average quarterback, that would have been a team that won at least 10 games last year with the talent they had on defense and the experience on the offensive line. And with Petersen overall, I think he didn't go for, just continuing what was going on with the regime before and say, oh, hey, we have all this talent. I'm going to just keep things doing what they're doing. He kind of broke it all down and started his own thing. And for better or worse, I think that kind of scared some people last year when they didn't play up to some of the talent they had. But what he was doing there, I think, might show in the next few years as he's building something for, 10 years. He didn't want to come in, have a big year last year, and then, have to start completely all over again. I think this year we're going to have to see if that Petersen principle, his aura is going to work, because there's not a whole lot of talent or experience coming back. So he's going to have to really show what he can do to win games this year in the Pac-12. And if he does that, I think he's going to win a lot of confidence with fans and I think people all around the Pac-12.
Yeah, and based on what he accomplished at Boise State, I think he's earned the right for 2 or 3 years, maybe even 4 years, to implement his system, get in his players, and turn the program around. Not that it's a reclamation project. The program's been on decent ground under Steve Sarkisian, getting to bowl games, getting to postseason play. We talk about Chris Petersen's work at Boise State. We mentioned the opener against Boise State. That's the one biggie non-conference. It's the Pac-12, so of course there are a few light touches. Washington does miss UCLA and Colorado in the schedule, but otherwise it's Stanford, Oregon. It's USC, Arizona State, Arizona, Utah in the South. It's kind of difficult to find in-conference wins in the schedule, Jack.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You look at that in-conference schedule and you just don't see a lot of places to say, oh, they're for sure going to win that game as you have the past few years. I mean, there's probably a couple games maybe against Washington State and Oregon State where you'd say, okay, they're probably going to be favored in those games. But other than that, they might not be favored in another Pac-12 game all season. And then compound that with a very tough game opener at Boise State, where they're going to be underdogs, and a sleeper upset chance against Utah State at home. And getting to a bowl game is going to be a big challenge this year for Chris Petersen.
Washington State and Oregon State are pretty marginal coming out of the North Division. I believe they both went 2-7 last season in conference. Cal's an emerging team. They played much better last year after a 1-11 campaign and possibly the best quarterback in the country. Where do you see Washington stacking up in the Pac-12 North?
Right now, I see them definitely in the third or fourth slot. I could see them really easily being in either one of those. It's kind of hard. I think it's going to be between them and Cal, and I think they're very, very even. Cal's coming a long ways. They're going to be really improved, but their defense is still a huge question mark, and they got to come up to Seattle. And they also have a really tough schedule. So I think Washington and Cal play the last weekend of September, and I think whoever wins that game in Seattle takes that third slot. I don't think they have any chance. Washington has any chance of jumping into the top two, and I think they have enough talent stocked in that on their roster not to slip down below Washington State or Oregon State. So I think they're firmly set in kind of that territory they have been the past 5 years or so. But I think Cal's going to give them a run for their money to get to that top half of that North.
All right, Jack Follman from Pacific Takes joining us once again. Jack, it's always a good breakdown from you, so we appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.